In the far edge of the human colonies, there was a place where the sky always looked heavy and the stars shone brighter than the city lights. People in that colony worked hard every day because life in space was not easy. Ships came and went carrying goods and carrying secrets. And in the small bars and markets, people whispered about strange visitors. The whispers were about alien women who came in secret. They were not like the violent raiders people feared, and not like the merchants who traded metal for food. They came with covered faces and soft voices, and they came with heavy bags of gold and crystal stones. And the rumor was always the same. They were offering money to human men, not for work in mines, not for piloting ships, but for something else, something no one wanted to say aloud. The rumor said that alien women were paying humans to make them pregnant. It sounded like madness. Why would the most advanced and beautiful species in the galaxy need humans for such a thing? People laughed about it in the day, but at night when the lights were dim and the silence grew longer, the laughter was gone. The fear was there, because no one knew if it was only a story or the truth. Daniel was a young man living in the colony. He worked in the shipyard fixing broken engines. His hands were strong, but his pockets were empty. His father had died in a mining accident, and his mother was sick and needed medicine that cost more than he could ever earn. So Daniel listened when the rumors came to him. At first he laughed like the others, but the thought stayed in his mind. If the story was real, then maybe he could change his life. Maybe he could save his mother. Maybe he could escape the endless work and hopeless days. One night as he walked home, he saw a figure waiting near the docks. The figure wore a long cloak and a mask that shone silver under the lamps. She was taller than a human woman, and her eyes glowed faintly blue from behind the mask. Her voice was soft but carried strength. She asked if he was Daniel. He froze. He had never seen her before, and yet she knew his name. He nodded slowly. She told him that she had an offer for him, an offer that would sound impossible and dangerous, but it was true. She told him that her people were dying, that their blood was weak, and their children were sickly, that no matter how much science they used, they could not create life that could survive. And then she said something that made his breath stop. Only humans could save. Then Daniel shook his head. He thought it was a trick. Why would aliens with such great ships and weapons need him? But her eyes did not move away from him. She said that human life carried a strength that no other race had, a hidden code in the blood that resisted decay and sickness. It was something her people had lost long ago, and now they had no choice but to turn to the humans they once ignored. She reached into her cloak and showed him a bag filled with gold and crystal. Enough money to feed his family for years. She said all of it was his if he agreed. His hands trembled as he looked at it. He thought of his mother coughing at home and of his small room with no heat. He thought of the long days in the shipyard that never ended. But then he thought of what she was asking. It was not work, it was not duty. It was something deeper, something that felt wrong and heavy. Silence stretched between them. The sound of the ships faded, and the air felt colder. Daniel asked her why she came to him and not to someone else. She said she chose him because he carried sadness in his eyes, and yet did not break under it. She said she needed someone who could carry not just the act of life, but the weight of hope, and she believed he was that one. Daniel felt his heart pound like a hammer. He wanted to run away, but his feet stayed still. The gold was real, and the pain in her voice was real. If what she said was true, then refusing her meant letting a whole race vanish into dust. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. She placed the bag in his hand and whispered that he would have one night to decide. Then she turned and walked into the shadows. Her figure disappeared as if the darkness swallowed her. Daniel stood alone, holding the weight of a choice he never asked for. The rumors were true. The alien women were real, and they wanted him. He looked up at the sky, and for the first time the stars did not shine like freedom. They looked like eyes watching him, waiting for his answer. Daniel did not sleep that night. He sat in his small room with the bag of gold beside him. He touched it again and again to see if it was real. It was heavy and cold, and it made his heart race. He thought of his mother coughing in the next room. He thought of the medicine she needed. He thought of how this gold could save her. But he also thought of the alien woman and her glowing eyes. Her words kept echoing in his mind. Your people carry the key to life. Only you can save us. The morning came slow. The light of the twin suns filled the room. His mother asked him if he was all right, because his face looked pale. He smiled weakly and said he was only tired from work. But deep inside he was carrying a secret so heavy it burned his chest. At the docks the same cloaked figure waited. She stood as if she had never moved since last night. Daniel walked toward her slowly. Every step felt like a chain pulling him down. When he reached her, she asked if he had made his choice. He looked at her mask and nodded. Yes, he whispered, I will do it. She turned and led him to a small ship hidden behind the larger freighters. It was shaped like a silver wing, and it opened with a hiss when they approached. Inside the ship was quiet and filled with a soft blue light. Daniel felt his fear grow stronger. He sat down and the ship lifted silently into the sky. Journey was short, but felt endless. His mind was filled with questions, but his mouth stayed shut. When they landed, the doors opened into a hall of crystal and stone. Alien women stood in silence, their faces hidden by veils. They all turned when Daniel entered. Their eyes glowed in different shades of blue and green, and in their gaze he saw both pride and sorrow. The cloaked woman removed her mask. Her face was pale with silver lines like rivers running across her skin. Her eyes were bright and full of weight. She spoke and her voice echoed in the hall. She said her name, but Daniel could not understand it. She told him he did not need to repeat it. She told him only this mattered, that he was now part of the contract of life. Daniel felt the eyes of all the alien women on him. He wanted to run, but his legs were weak. The cloaked woman told him that before anything could begin he must understand the truth. She guided him to a chamber where images floated in the air like living pictures. He saw alien cities once filled with children, now empty. He saw great ships leaving their world searching for answers. He saw scientists trying to build life with machines and failing, and he saw graves stretching longer than the horizon. Her voice broke as she said their time was ending. Daniel asked why humans, why not another race? She said they had tried many, but human blood was unique. It carried something no science could build. It carried resilience, the ability to heal and to endure, the ability to create new life where other blood failed. She told him this was why they had come in secret, because their leaders feared shame, because they were once proud and thought themselves above all others. Now they needed humans, and if the truth was known, their empire would fall apart. Daniel felt a strange pull in his heart. He wanted to hate them for their arrogance, but he also saw the despair in their eyes. They were not begging out of greed. They were begging out of survival. The cloaked woman stepped closer. She held out a thin sheet made of light. It was the contract. It glowed softly, and the words moved like water. She told him it was simple. If he signed with his hand, he would become part of their legacy. He would give them children who could live, and in return, he would be given wealth and safety beyond his dreams. But she warned him, this was not only a contract of flesh, it was a bond of spirit. Their people did not carry life lightly. When they connected to a human, it would link their memories and their hearts. He would carry their pain. He would carry their hope. Daniel's throat was dry. He asked if he would survive it. Her answer was soft. Most men did, she said, but not all. The risk was there. The choice was his. He looked again at the glowing sheet. He thought of his mother coughing. He thought of the empty future waiting for him in the shipyard. He thought of the alien faces watching him in silence, and then he reached out his hand. Moment his skin touched the light, he felt a sharp heat run through him. It was not only on his hand, it was in his chest. In his mind he saw flashes of cities that were not his. He heard voices crying in languages he did not know. He felt sorrow so deep it almost broke him, but he also felt strength. He felt something burning inside him like a new fire. The contract closed itself, and the sheet of light faded. The cloaked woman bowed her head. "It is done," she said. "You are now bound to us. Your blood is our hope." Daniel's body shook as he tried to stand. He felt as if he had given away more than he understood. Alien women lowered their heads in respect. And in that silence he understood the weight of what he had done. He was no longer just Daniel from the colony. He was the bearer of life for a race that could not survive without him. As the chamber doors closed behind him, Daniel wondered if he had made a choice, or if the choice had been made long before he was born. Daniel was led into another chamber. The walls shone like living glass and the air was filled with a soft hum. He felt weak from the contract, but he tried to stand tall. The cloaked woman told him this place was where the bond would begin. She said it was not like human birth or human love. It was something deeper. It would connect not only the body, but the mind and the soul. Daniel felt fear crawl in his chest. He asked her what it meant to be bound in spirit. She said he would soon know. She said once the bond started, he would see memories that were not his. He would feel emotions that belonged to another being, and once joined, they could not be broken until life itself ended. The chamber filled with a glow, and another woman stepped forward. Her skin carried golden lines and her eyes were deep green. She lowered her head slightly as if to show respect. But her gaze was sharp and full of need. Daniel could feel her sorrow before she spoke. She said she was chosen because her bloodline was the weakest. Her children never lived beyond the first days. She had buried too many dreams in the cold earth of her world. Now she carried the last hope of her family, and that hope was him. Daniel's throat was dry. He wanted to say he was not worthy. He wanted to say he was just a poor worker from the colony, but her eyes told him none of that mattered. To her, he was not small. To her, he was the line between life and extinction. Cloaked woman told him to step into the circle at the center of the floor. The circle pulsed with light like a heart beating slowly. Daniel walked inside, and the green-eyed woman joined him. The moment she entered the circle, he felt the air grow heavy. The hum in the chamber grew louder. And then he felt a flood of images rushed into his mind. He saw a small child with golden lines on her skin laughing under a sky of twin moons. Then he saw the same child fade and turn still in her mother's arms. He felt the scream of grief tear through the woman's chest. He felt nights filled with silence and empty arms. He felt centuries of a race fighting against the cold weight of failure. Daniel cried out and fell to his knees. The pain was not his yet. It tore him apart. The woman reached for him and placed her hand on his face. Her touch was warm and filled with trembling. She whispered that he must endure, that this pain was the bridge, that only by carrying it could life be born again. Daniel tried to breathe, but every breath carried another memory. He saw wars fought to protect children who never lived. He saw temples filled with prayers that were never answered. He saw mothers and fathers digging graves under broken skies. And through it all, he felt the despair of a people who knew their time was ending. But then another feeling came. It was soft and fragile, a spark hidden under the weight of darkness. It was hope, not his hope, but hers. The hope that maybe with him her child would live. The hope that maybe the graves would end. The hope that her race could rise again. Daniel clung to that spark. He held it in his chest like a fire against the cold. He whispered that he would not let her break. He whispered that he would carry her sorrow if it meant she could have life. The chamber lights grew brighter, and the hum became a song. The circle of light wrapped around them both, and Daniel felt his body grow heavy. It was as if his strength was pouring into her, as if his very soul was being shared. He shook and sweat covered his skin. His heart pounded until he thought it would tear apart. Then silence. The light faded and the hum was gone. Daniel lay on the floor, weak and trembling. The green-eyed woman knelt beside him. Her face was wet with tears, but in her eyes he saw something new, a glow of warmth that had not been there before. She whispered that the bond was made, that the seed of life was inside her. Now, and for the first time in her life, she felt no fear of losing it. Daniel closed his eyes and tried to rise, but his body felt drained, as if he had given away half of himself. He asked if this was how it always was. The cloaked woman nodded slowly. She said the bond was not just about creating a child. It was about sharing the weight of existence. It was about binding two lives into one thread, and that was the hidden cost. Daniel understood now why the others spoke of danger. It was not only the risk of death, it was the risk of losing oneself, because every child born this way would carry not only human blood, it would carry human memories, and the fathers would carry alien sorrow until the end of their days. The thought filled him with dread, but also with a strange pride. He was more than a man now. He was a bearer of two worlds. He was a bridge. The green-eyed woman touched his hand gently. She whispered that he had given her more than gold could ever buy. She whispered that if her child lived, she would never forget his gift. Her voice shook with emotion, and Daniel felt it echo inside him. It was no longer her sorrow alone. It was his too. The cloaked woman helped him stand. She said this was only the beginning. Many others would come. Many other bonds would be made, and each one would drain him more. Daniel felt fear again. He wondered how many times he could survive this. He wondered how much of himself would remain when it was over. But when he looked at the green-eyed woman holding her stomach with trembling hands, when he saw the light of hope in her tears, he knew he could not turn back. The cost was high, but the weight of a dying race was heavier, and now it rested on him. As the doors opened and the hall filled with alien voices chanting softly, Daniel realized the whispers in the colony were only the beginning. The true story was far deeper and far darker, and he was standing at the center of it. Daniel stayed among the alien halls for many days. His body grew weaker with each bond, and his dreams grew stranger. At night he saw visions of cities he had never walked. He felt the cries of children he had never held, and he woke with tears that were not his own. Green-eyed woman carried herself with new strength. She touched her stomach often and whispered words of prayer. Daniel could feel her hope burning bright through the bond. It gave him courage but also fear. If her child lived, then he had changed a future. But if the child died, he would feel her sorrow again, and he was not sure if his heart could survive another storm. Cloaked woman stayed close to him. She guided him through the halls and told him pieces of truth, but Daniel began to see shadows in her words. Too many things were hidden, too many doors were closed, and each silence made him wonder what they were not telling him. One night he wandered alone through the corridors. The halls were quiet, and the walls glowed faintly with blue light. He reached a door that was half open. Inside he heard voices speaking in low tones. He stepped closer and listened. Voices were sharp and filled with anger. One said the humans were too weak and would never save them. Another said they had no choice because no other race had the code in their blood. A third voice spoke with bitterness. It said this was punishment for their pride. It said they had lived for thousands of years believing they were pure and perfect. They had rejected the idea of mixing with others. They had built walls around their bloodlines, and now those walls had become their graves. Daniel froze. The truth struck him harder than any bond. These aliens were not victims of chance. They were victims of their own arrogance. They had chosen purity over survival. They had chosen pride over change. And now they had come to him begging for life because their own choices had doomed them. He felt anger rise in his chest. They had once looked at humans as weak and simple. Now they needed that same weakness to save themselves. The gold they offered was not just payment, it was the price of their shame. Daniel stepped back from the door, his heart pounding. He wanted to confront them, but fear held him still. If he spoke the truth aloud, he might never leave this place alive. They needed secrecy more than they needed honesty. If humans learned the truth, the entire empire of these aliens would collapse. He returned to his chamber, but sleep did not come. Memories of the bond still burned in his mind, and now the new truth weighed heavier than all of it. He was not just a savior, he was a weapon against their pride. He was the mirror showing them what they had become. The next day, the cloaked woman came to him with another contract. She told him another family awaited his bond. but Daniel shook his head. He asked her why her people had never chosen to mix their blood with others before. Her eyes turned cold for a moment. She said it was forbidden. By their law, it was seen as weakness. Daniel asked her if she knew that this law had destroyed them. Her silence was his answer. Daniel felt his voice grow stronger. He told her that what they were doing was not only about survival, it was about hiding the truth from the galaxy. They wanted humans to save them, but they wanted no one to know why. They wanted to keep their pride even while begging for help. The cloaked woman's face hardened. She warned him not to speak such things. She said if the truth spread, there would be chaos and war. She said humans would demand power in exchange for life, and her people would rather burn than bow. Daniel looked into her glowing eyes, and he understood they had not truly changed, even in their desperation. They still clung to arrogance. They would rather pay with gold than with honesty. They would rather bind humans in secret than admit their weakness in the light. He felt trapped between two fires. If he kept silent, he would become their hidden tool. If he spoke, he might unleash a storm that could consume both species. That night Daniel dreamed again. He saw a child with eyes like his and skin like theirs. The child stood between two broken worlds and held them together with small hands. The child spoke without words, and Daniel felt the message in his heart: truth brings life. Lies bring death. When he woke, his choice began to take shape. He could not let pride rule the fate of an entire race. He could not let secrecy turn hope into chains. He would have to bring the truth into the open, no matter the cost. Cloaked woman entered his chamber and asked if he was ready for the next bond. Daniel stood tall, though his body shook with weakness. He told her no. He told her he would not take another step until her people faced what they had done. She stared at him in silence for a long moment. Then she whispered that he did not understand the danger of his words. Her people would never accept such shame. They would destroy him before they bowed to truth. Daniel felt fear, but he also felt fire in his chest. He said maybe they could silence him, but they could not silence the bond. Every child born would carry both human and alien blood. Every child would be proof of what they had tried to hide. The truth would live in those children, whether they wanted it or not. The cloaked woman's eyes trembled with fury and sorrow. She turned away without a word and left him alone. Daniel sat in silence and felt the weight of the coming storm. He had uncovered the secret that could shatter empires. And now he knew that his choice would decide not only the fate of one race, but the balance of the galaxy itself. Daniel knew the storm could not be delayed forever. The truth was heavy in his heart, and the bond in his blood burned like fire. He had seen their pride and he had felt their sorrow. He had carried their memories and their pain. Now he carried their secret too, and secrets were like chains. Chains that broke or chains that crushed. The cloaked woman kept him under watch. Her eyes followed him wherever he walked. She warned him again and again to keep silent. She said his duty was to give life, not to spread words. She said his voice could bring war between humans and her people. Daniel listened, but his silence was no longer fear. It was waiting. One morning he was taken to the Great Hall. Alien leaders stood on high platforms, their robes glowing with light. Their faces were stern and proud, though their race was dying. They spoke of gratitude for his bonds. They offered him more gold and promised him comfort if he continued. But they never spoke of truth. They never spoke of their pride that had doomed them. They only spoke of survival without shame. Daniel looked at them and felt his anger rise. He thought of the child he saw in his dreams, a child who held two worlds in small hands. He thought of his mother back in the colony. He thought of all the humans who worked and struggled with nothing. And now he stood in a hall filled with riches beyond counting. He could not stay silent anymore. He stepped forward, his voice strong, though his body was weak. He told the leaders that he knew their secret. He told them that their people were dying not because of chance, but because of pride. He told them that they had refused to mix their blood with others. They had built walls around themselves until those walls became tombs. And now they came to humans in secret. Because only human blood could save them. The hall grew silent. The leaders stared with cold fury. The cloaked woman lowered her head as if struck by shame. The other alien women whispered among themselves, their voices trembling. One leader raised his hand and shouted that Daniel must be silenced, that no human should ever speak such words, that their empire would never bow to such disgrace. But before his order could be given, the green-eyed woman stepped forward. Her voice shook, but it carried through the hall. She said Daniel spoke truth. She said she carried his bond within her. She said she could feel life growing strong in her womb for the first time, and that life was both alien and human, and that truth could not be hidden any longer. The hall erupted in cries. Some shouted for silence. Some shouted for war, but many fell to their knees weeping, because they knew what she said was real. The leaders tried to control them, but the weight of hope was stronger than fear. Daniel saw the moment pride began to crumble. It was not in the words of power, but in the tears of mothers. It was not in the gold of the leaders, but in the glow of life carried by women who had known only loss. The truth was no longer his secret. It was alive in every bond. It was alive in every child to come. The leaders tried to strike him down. Guards moved forward with weapons raised, but the alien women stood in front of him. They shielded him with their bodies. They lifted their voices and said, "No more graves, no more silence, no more lies." The leaders saw their power slipping away and their empire shaking. They could not kill the messenger without killing their own last hope. Daniel felt his knees weaken. He had spoken the truth, but he did not know what future would come. Would humans see this as power to control? Would aliens see this as shame to hide, or would both see it as a chance to build something new? He returned to the colony weeks later. The story spread faster than ships could fly. At first people laughed, then they grew silent, then they listened, and soon volunteers came forward. Not for gold, not for riches, but because they saw a chance to change the stars, because they saw that life itself was asking for help. Alien ships came no longer in secret. They came openly and stood in human markets and human halls. They offered not gold but alliance. They offered not silence but truth. And though many feared and many doubted, children were born. Children with eyes like starlight and strength like stone. Children who carried both worlds in their small hands. Daniel lived to see them grow. He saw their laughter in places where silence ruled. He saw alien mothers holding babies that did not fade in their arms. He saw humans and aliens working side by side, not as masters and servants, but as family bound by blood. He knew the cost had been heavy. His own body never fully healed from the bonds. He carried the memories of sorrow and pain until his last days. But he also carried pride, not the pride that destroyed a race, but the pride of knowing he had given them a chance to rise again when his time came. He sat under the twin suns with his mother beside him. She was old, but alive because of the gold he once brought. She held his hand and told him she was proud. In the distance, children played, their laughter echoing across the colony, some human, some alien, some both. It was the sound of survival. It was the sound of truth. When Daniel closed his eyes for the last time, he knew the galaxy would remember not the weapons of empires, not the pride of rulers, but the spark of life that only humans could give, and that spark would burn across the stars forever. The end.